Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Rockies Daily. I'm your host, Scott Ayers, where we talk all things Colorado Rockies. Folks, we did it. We hit 50 subs. We're essentially the biggest channel on YouTube at this point, and it's all because of you. So I just want to say thank you. We continue to grow this thing out, so make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, share it to your mother, share it to your father, and let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the Rockies where, they've done something pretty impressive. They are one of two teams that have yet to sign a major league free agent. Them and the Boston Red Sox. That's right. You heard that right. The Rockies have done the impossible. They have failed to sign anyone of any relevance whatsoever. They did sign Nicky Lopez, John Brebbia. They've made a couple of signings, but nothing of note. Now, there is obviously a caveat in all of this, right? The Rockies have built out their entire front office. They've made a ton of signings. None of them happen to actually be players, though. While you can make that excuse, I do think it's worth noting that the Rockies should be in conversation at least with certain players. Really, it's just been Willie Castro is the only player that the Rockies have been mentioned in. There hasn't been any rumors for the Rockies like you see for just about every team in baseball. And so that is one thing to note, right? Brenton Doyle's name, who we'll talk about a little bit later this show, is really the only guy that the Rockies seem to be shopping. So they're not really shopping anyone that we're super aware of. And they're not in conversation with too many players at the moment. And I think that does need to change before the season starts here in a few months. I do think it's really important to at least get some type of veteran leadership on this team, regardless if it's a veteran that is going to make a huge impact or a smaller one. There's just a ton of young guys on this team that could be really good. The problem is the team failed to win 50 games last year. There's obvious areas of improvement. And I think sitting on your hands for an entire free agency is the wrong move. It doesn't make sense for the Rockies. They need to find a way to sign a couple of guys that can make an impact next year. Because let's face it, we'll talk about them. Their starting third baseman is going to be 23 years old to start the year. And it's not like the guys in the infield outside of Tovar all had really impressive debuts. They were all guys that struggled. And really, outside the outfield, you really want to see them try to make a couple of moves, either for starting pitching, you could look at bullpen, you could look at third base, second base, first base. I mean, I just named off pretty much every position group. And there's still time. The clock hasn't struck midnight or zero, however you want to say it. But this is the time for the Rockies to actually have conversations with players and look at making a couple of different signings. And they just haven't done that. And it's a little more embarrassing maybe for the Red Sox just because they are much more of a contending team. But they are in conversations. You see the Red Sox and a bunch of different headlines for different players. We just really haven't seen that for the Rockies. We've seen, obviously, the headlines for different staff hires and changes made. But when it comes to actual players, it's crickets. And I don't think it should be crickets. I think they need to be having conversations. And that's not to say that they aren't. There's just been zero reports of it. And so when there's smoke, there's fire. And we just haven't seen a lot of smoke. And that will be a big thing here in the next month or two is where will the Rockies look to capitalize now that they have, obviously their GM, assistant GMs, and they've built out, much more of the staff. That being said, let's jump into free agency and talk about the different areas, right? We mentioned some different places where the Rockies can look. We've talked a lot about first base. I do think starting pitching is worth noting as well. And there's different tiers of starting pitching that the Rockies can look at. Right? Obviously, Zach Gallen is part of that top tier of pitching that the Rockies probably aren't going to make a splash in this year, but I think it would be definitely worth noting if the Rockies are willing to open that checkbook. Can you try to make a splash on someone like Zach Gallen, Framber Valdez, right? Guys that are going to make an immediate impact, that are going to be at the top of your pitching rotation. And that should be something that the Rockies note, is going after, one of these available starting pitchers, because you're probably not going to be able to make a trade. And we'll touch on it with Doyle here shortly, but the Rockies probably don't have the assets to make a trade for a top-tier pitcher. They can make a trade for a guy that's maybe in Double or Triple A. That could be a top-tier pitcher, but for guys that are already proven, there's just not enough assets there right now for the Rockies. So why not look at one of these available free agents that haven't signed yet? For Zach Gallen right now, it looks like, he's going to be commanding a contract that's up to $150 million. Are the Rockies willing to spend on guys like that? And the answer has to be yes. And it maybe not right now, but it does have to be yes in the next couple of years if you actually want to build something. You can't just rely on young prospects to get it done. It's just not possible. So there are a couple obvious options at the top of the food chain. But if you say, hey, we just want to kind of see what our younger guys can do, but we need, maybe a third, fourth, or fifth piece of a rotation, then you look at someone like Nick Martinez, who's been with the Reds the last couple of years. He's coming out of the bullpen. 2025, his numbers for, both home runs allowed and ER did go up. But it is another name to consider, right? He's going to be more affordable than a Zach Gallen or a Valdez, but he could still be someone that you have in the rotation. He could be someone that the Rockies look to. And it's for sure worth considering. It'd be crazy not to look at that and say, hey, this is going to be a more affordable pitching prospect that can still make an impact. Because there are guys like John Gray is available. I don't see why the Rockies would go after Gray, who did have success in Colorado, but there is a chance that a reunion there is unlikely. So why not look at someone like Nick Martinez, right? There's other prospects as well. I say prospects. There's other free agents as well that the Rockies should consider, but just different tiers of pitching, and I have a feeling that the Rockies will lean more towards the Nick Martinez than they will the Zach Gallen, but both should definitely be in consideration, and both should be focuses of the Rockies when it comes to pitching. Then there's obviously the position players, right? We obviously have mentioned Willie Castro as the one name the Rockies have been in conversation with, but I think there's other players like Jose Iglesias. He's another veteran player that can play multiple positions in the infield that I think would give the Rockies a much-needed bump or boost, even if he's not an everyday starter. Same with, Kike Hernandez, who will probably end up back with the Dodgers. But these are things you have to consider are getting veterans. You can't just keep throwing young guy out there game after game. There is a point where you can actually be maybe a little too young, and I think it's very, very important for that development of those younger guys. But if they're in a slump and they're really struggling, you want to be able to lean on maybe one of the vets that you have on the roster. So that's where Castro, Jose Iglesias are different names to at least consider as potential infielders that could hopefully give a boost to this team. Obviously, Eugenio Suarez is available. A ton of power there, would play third base, would be an everyday starter for Colorado. He's in that same category, though, as some of the pitchers that we'd mentioned, that he's just going to cost more. And the Rockies have to decide if they're willing to spend yet, or if this is just going to be another developmental season and you wait until next year's free agency and say, okay, now we're willing to spend now that we know the pieces that we have. That's a real possibility. But you do still need to make some signings. You can't just rely on Nicky Lopez to have, a good AAA get brought up and play. And that's not to say that won't be a possibility, but you want someone that can make contributions. Nicky Lopez just was downright terrible last year. So that's, I think, the one frustrating thing for the Rockies right now. They just haven't been mentioned in much when it comes to free agency. So hate to hit that over the head over and over again. I've loved what they've done with their staff, their front office, and everything, but they need to pursue some of these targets in free agency, or else it's just going to be another terrible year. And you will see development for younger guys, but fans do want to see progress, right? And progress, it shouldn't be, this year we won 52 games. That's not bad. All right, now the roster on paper, it isn't good enough. Not only to just not compete, but to be any form of relevant. So, Dick Monfort, open up the checkbook, make some signings before the season starts. There's still time, but you can go on and on about, you can make excuses, but there really should be no excuse for the Rockies not to sign anyone before the season starts. We'll kind of see who that might be. And we talk about signings. Now let's talk about, obviously, trades. Brenton Doyle was kind of the focus. He was the guy that the Rockies were kind of dangling out there. Hey, you want this? Here's our one valuable guy. And it's now being reported by Ken Rosenthal that the Rockies are going to hold on to Brenton Doyle, which I actually don't mind. I like holding on to Brenton Doyle. He is obviously one of the more valuable pieces. He's probably the best defensive player on the team. He struggled at times, but there were some off-the-field issues going on that could be the cause for a lot of that. And Doyle, obviously still super promising. And if you were to trade him, you might be selling him actually a bit low. So if you do consider trading Doyle down the road, maybe he has a great start to the season and you could actually get more. So I don't hate that idea. And I also don't hate the idea of just making him a core piece that you hold on to for the long haul. Because, in any sport, you need good players to succeed as a team. And that's not to say Doyle wouldn't bring in some talented players, but it could be something, hey, this is a guy we want to see for the long haul. But it is interesting because now that Brenton Doyle probably won't be traded in the offseason, there's other guys that you could look to. The Rockies do have a couple of relievers. I think Victor Vodnik could be the most likely to be traded. He could actually bring in some value too. So there's still some trade options for the Rockies, and I don't want to rule out that a trade won't be made this offseason, but it feels a little bit more unlikely with Doyle's name kind of being pulled out. And again, I don't hate it. I think all of us just want to see the Rockies do anything, right? Free agency, make a trade, obviously make a logical trade. This is an organization that has made trades that have put us on the brink, needless to say, have put fans on the brink. And so obviously you want to make a deal that makes sense. And I think the staff that they now have will obviously make trades that are not going to make fans groan, but also means we're going to be in these times where we're just waiting. We're just sitting on our hands. We're looking up to the Rocky gods, just wanting something. And so, needless to say, I'm actually happy Doyle isn't going to be dealt during this offseason. I think his value dropped. I just like him in general too, but I hope he has a great start to 2026. So then the Rockies are put with the hard decision if they want to keep him because he's still under contract for quite some time, or trade him and try to get more. So that kind of makes sense for the Doyle end of things. Then we go into the last thing here, and it is for the Colorado Rockies. They are at an interesting crossroads where they have to decide, once again, what are they going to do when it comes to building out this team, right? It is interesting because the Rockies have a bunch of young guys. They have a bunch of young guys, and Kyle Karros is that young guy at third base. And in his 156 plate appearances, he struck out 26% of the time, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but his slugging was 277, right? He just didn't have much pop in the bat. And again, he's young. He's 23 years old. And there should be expectations that obviously all of his numbers are going to bump, right? He just came in at the end of last season. Again, had about 160 plate appearances. But this is something for the Rockies across the board. They have a ton of young guys and a ton of prospects that they've brought up, right? We've mentioned Zach Veen, another young guy that they brought up last year that there was a ton of hype around, and ultimately it was underwhelming. And Karros is another one of those guys that was brought up, showed some flashes, but ultimately 2026 is going to be a huge test of kind of what to expect from the young third baseman. And I don't think it's fair to put all expectations and say, hey, we need you to be an all-star, go out there and play. But what we've talked about is we do want to see some signs that, hey, we want to see that you're able to play at the major league level. And there is a little bit of pressure just because there aren't really too many guys right now because the Rockies haven't made any signings. So it kind of creates this interesting situation where young guys are going to be able to play freely, but there is going to be an expectation of, hey, as we're building this out, if you're struggling, there's a chance that maybe you get sent down, maybe we're not interested in having you start anymore. The timetable, though, it isn't going to be like a 20-game sample size, right? But it is worth noting, and it goes back to free agency, it goes back to trades, it goes back to the overall roster, that the Rockies, they have so many holes. And to rely on a bunch of guys that are, under 26, 25, a 23-year-old playing third base is really exciting, but it's also, hey, we didn't see a ton last year. We need something this year. And so for Karros, I am excited to see what he brings. I'm excited to see what a lot of these young guys bring after what was such a bad season last year. And I think that's where some of the concern is. Fans don't want to keep going to the games if the team keeps getting just blown out because of bad pitching, bad hitting, and bad fielding. And so that's where the pressure lies, is obviously all expectations should be, hey, this team will be better than last year. But we want to see it be better than just a very small improvement. Like, I don't think it's crazy for fans to want to see a 60-win season, right? Like, a 60-win season and you have a bunch of guys that look really promising would be awesome. And 60 wins is pretty pathetic, in all honesty. But that's where we're at, just because of how bad the last 3 seasons have been. So, try to obviously get the most out of these young guys. And who knows, like maybe we will get, something that just blows us away, product on the field. But until we're actually shown that, the expectations aren't going to be that high. But there are still expectations. And I think the front office knows that. That Denver is a sports town. Denver has a lot of success in football, basketball, hockey. Those are 3 of the best teams in their respected sports, the Nuggets, the Avs, and the Broncos, right? They are all competing for championships. And for the Rockies to be as bad as they've been for really the existence of the organization's history, there's not a lot of excuses left. And this is obviously turning into a rant that I wasn't expecting. But at some point, the Rockies need to do something. You can't just hang your hat on a World Series appearance that happened nearly 20 years ago, or a wild card victory that's approaching 10 years ago. You have to, as a franchise, start to build something. And I've mentioned I've loved the front office moves. I've really appreciated them stepping outside the organization. But now is the time to actually start to build. And you can look at the other 3 Denver sports teams even, say, hey, they've all built something. They've all brought in the right pieces and the right guys, and it's taken time, but it's worked. And the Rockies building, it's like instead of using, legit building material, they're not even using a house of cards. They're using feathers. They're using bird feathers off of a fallen nest. And they're shocked that they haven't had any success. outside the rooftop bar that brings in just probably a buttload of money. That's it. That's really been the biggest success of the last 10 years is the rooftop bar and a win against the Cubs in a wild card series. So that was not how I expected this show to end. We were talking about third base, and we then just talked about the organization as a whole, and just want to see something. That's all I ask. Just give us something, right? I'm not even, well, I guess I'm begging. I was going to say I'm not begging. I'm begging. And if I could be on my hands and knees right now to beg, I would. But I'm not gonna. Not gonna do it. Not on this. That's showbiz, baby. So anyways, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe. If you like more rants like that one that I ended the show with, let me know. If you think, hey, that was the worst rant ever, also leave a comment. That helps us grow this thing out. Helps me obviously cater this to what people want to hear about. So anyways, I'm Scott Ayers. Until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day.